All right, Hannah, ready to talk about the southern U.S.? We're going to talk about some of the scariest stuff over there.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the South, but I don't think you'll catch me in any of these places.
No, probably not. All right, we're going to start off our southern U.S. tour with the Yorktown Memorial Hospital in Yorktown, Texas. This place is haunted by two very conflicting types of entities, the ghosts of nuns, and then they have a demon with glowing red eyes that growls when people read from Bible verses. So it's gotta be a pretty contentious kind of living situation. Demons and ghostly nuns being forced to live alongside each other. Are they existing in some sort of like afterlife reality show or something? Like, who cooked up this idea? Now, luckily this hospital is no longer operational. It seems like this is a very stressful place to live, especially if you're ill already. Even when it was in operation though, this would have been a freaky place to stay. Apparently, there was one doctor, Dr. Norwiski, who was practicing well into his 90s, and he'd even performed surgeries. Apparently a number of people actually died under his care as he got older, because they still let this frail old man perform surgeries on people. One story goes that the doctor was performing a surgery on this poor man's thyroid, and the doctor's hand slipped because like he's 90 something. They're not really known for having steady hands. And then he accidentally just sliced the guy's throat and killed him. So his ghost haunts the place, the dead. Then you have the violent ghost nuns who will scratch people when they come in for tours, especially if they have tattoos.
Next up on our list today, we have the southern state of Texas, which was at one time home to a very bad man who went by the name of Dean Corll, a man who remains to this day a very dark stain in the history books of Texas. The events that turned the town of Houston dark took place between 1970 and 1973, during which time the lives of at least 28 young men were ended at the hands of Corll. Originally born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Corll moved to Texas with his mother after she divorced his father and remarried a traveling salesman. Sometime in the 1960s, Corll met a woman who he had fallen madly in love with and had even decided to propose, but to his surprise he was rejected and the relationship fell apart. A few years later, his mother's second marriage began to crumble as well, and despite Corll's efforts, the relationship also ended. Apparently, the events leading up to 1970 had taken quite a toll on Corll, as on September 25th of that same year, he committed his first known offense. Corll had taken a young man and ended his life. Shortly after, Corll took two more men against their wills and subsequently ended their lives. But this time he was caught in the act by a man who, in exchange for a green Chevrolet Corvette and a chunk of cash, became Corll's partner in crime, luring as many victims as he could into Corll's apartment. Eventually, another accomplice, Henley, was acquired by similar means. However, the partnership didn't last long, as on August 8th of 1973, Corll's life was ended at the hands of Henley, who yelled, "We've gone too far," before ending Corll's life with a handheld weapon.
Next up, we have Sloss Furnaces in Alabama. This place was notorious for its horrible working conditions. And by that, I mean a lot of workers died here. It was a pig iron producing blast furnace that began operating in 1882. At the time, there were no government policies in place to protect workers, so things weren't great. They weren't paid a lot, and they usually worked very long hours while being forced into some pretty dangerous situations in order to get the job done. Workers weren't suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. They were falling into boiling pits of molten steel. Boiling and molten. I said both. Boiling and it's molten. It was very hot. They died instantly. The place just had danger around every corner, and every day these men were risking their lives. One of the worst deaths happened to a guy who got caught in a large flywheel. So he accidentally got too close to it, it caught his clothing, and he was dragged into the gears, his body becoming less and less of a body each time the wheel turned. And presiding over all of this madness was the foreman, known as Slag, apparently, and he was just as nasty as his name sounds. He treated the workers like subhuman pawns, so it's no surprise that this place is said to be haunted by the workers who died there till this very day.
Up next, we have Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky, home to Hamilton, Ohio-born Donald Harvey, also known as the Angel of Death. Coming from a broken home where he was dropped as a child and continuously physically abused, Harvey by no means had an easy life. He was antisocial and quiet, which led to him being bullied a lot in school, leading him to eventually drop out. Later in life, Harvey obtained his GED and soon after began working as an orderly in Marymount Hospital in London. On May 31st of 1970, Harvey claimed the life of his first and second victims. The first was Logan Evans, whose life Harvey took in a bout of rage after the 88-year-old patient had rubbed feces on Harvey's face. The second was James Tyree, who died after Harvey accidentally gave the man the wrong catheter. On June 22nd of that same year, Harvey performed what he called his first mercy killing, holding the pillow over the face of Elizabeth Wyatt in what he described as an attempt to spare her from suffering. Harvey later went on to end the lives of at least 37 to 47 victims, although he claimed the number to be somewhere much closer to 90. He was arrested in 1971 for burglary and confessed to his crimes, but he was intoxicated and the police weren't buying it, so he was released on a petty theft charge. And it wasn't until 1987 that Harvey was first accused of murder after a biopsy on one of his patients showed signs of cyanide poisoning. Harvey pleaded guilty to 37 counts of murder and was sentenced to life plus 20 years in prison, where he was severely beaten and later died from his injuries.
All right, let's talk about a haunted cemetery next. Stull Cemetery in Kansas. I'm going to say the names of each of these states with the accent, by the way. Get used to it. All right, this may be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the United States. That's because Stull Cemetery is haunted by not just the ghosts of witches, but satanic cults have gathered here to carry out rituals. There's also said to be a gateway to hell underneath the abandoned church right next to the cemetery, which has now been torn down. So now it's just an exposed gateway to hell on this piece of land. And of course, Satan himself also makes some appearances on occasion, especially on Halloween. So there's a lot going on in this place, none of it good, even without the witches and hell and Satan. At the end of the day, it's still a cemetery, so it's not the most joyous kind of place. Apparently, Stull Cemetery has such a reputation for evil that the Pope himself, not sure which, but he refused to visit the place, claiming it was a demonic piece of land. I do wonder, though, if he was actually referring to this cemetery specifically, or if that was just a diss against Kansas in general. Did the Pope have a thing against Kansas? Is Kansas a demonic piece of land? I've never been, so someone please leave your thoughts in the comments. Shed some light on this if you're from Kansas, please.
Next up, we've got the Cecil Hotel located in Los Angeles, Southern California. If you've seen American Horror Story, you're probably familiar with this one, and if you haven't, just know this place is terrifying enough to base an entire season of an award-winning horror series off of. The Cecil Hotel is infamous for having an incredibly large death toll, as well as a pretty ominous client base, including two known mass killers, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and Jack Underwaker. As for the deaths, there have been at least 16 sudden or unexplainable deaths that have taken place within the walls of the Cecil, from fallings, jumpings, pushings, and drownings all the way to unknown disappearances. Those who have come and gone to the Cecil without so much as a scratch are most certainly among the favored. Due to the negative reputation, in 2011, the hotel was forced to change its name to Stay on Main in an effort to revamp tourism, but even this couldn't save it. In 2022, the Cecil closed its doors to all except for its long-term residents and handed the building over to the Skid Row Housing Trust, who now manages the property, which has become a privately funded, long-term, low-income housing property.
Next up, we head to Georgia for a nice swim in Lake Lanier. Unfortunately, though, many who decide to swim in this lake are never seen again. So it's not really the nicest swim for some. This lake is pretty notorious for mysterious drownings. It seems to swallow people up year in and year out, but it's still a very popular vacation spot. In total, there have been 700 mysterious deaths on this lake, 200 of which have happened since 1994. Now, I'm sure you have your standard drownings here as well, but the oddest cases here are when people dive under the water and just never come back up. So what's going on in this place? Well, there are many who believe this lake to be haunted or cursed. So you see, this lake hasn't always been there. It was an artificially created lake, which was completed in 1956, but a lot of people lived on the land that now sits under the lake. Now, some places were torn down or moved, but there are still some homes and even a couple cemeteries that are still down there. Ghost town sitting at the bottom of a lake. So, are the spirits of those whose graves were disturbed lingering at the bottom of the lake, dragging unlikely swimmers to the depths.
Next on the list, we have the Queen Mary, also located in Southern California, and also terrifying enough to earn itself a secure spot in television and film. The Queen Mary was in service from 1936 to 1967, with its maiden voyage taking place on the 27th of May, 1936. The deaths of at least 49 individuals were recorded on the Queen Mary during its service in World War II, and it is now said that many of those who perished aboard the vessel can still be seen roaming its halls to this day. On May 8th of 1971, after undergoing some serious refurbishing, the Queen Mary was opened to the public as a hotel that allowed visitors to explore its original porthole adorned walls. Certain rooms aboard the ship have been said to be much more active than others in regards to ghost sightings, including stateroom B340, where Walter J. Adams took his final breath in 1948, after which guests of the room have reported having their sheets ripped off their bodies in the middle of the night, lights and sinks turning on and off, knocking on the walls, and even sightings of the man. The boiler room is another in which several guests have reported seeing a young woman holding a doll and sucking her thumb. And of course, we can't forget the first-class swimming pool, which is said to be home to many different apparitions, with sightings ranging from women in wedding gowns to very young people in suits and dresses.
Next up, we head to Arkansas with the Crescent Hotel and Spa in Eureka Springs. This is said to be one of America's most haunted hotels and spas. The place has a very dark history, and that has a lot to do with a man named Dr. Norman Baker, but we'll get to him in a bit. So at first, just during the hotel's construction in 1885, an Irish stonemason fell to his death from room 218, and this room has since become a hotbed of spiritual activity. Known as Michael, the ghost in room 218 has been labeled a poltergeist, an Irish poltergeist. Not the most lucky man in the world. Guests who have stayed in room 218 have reported seeing hands emerging from the bathroom mirror, the sound of a falling man in the ceiling. Boy, hear him rolling around up there, doors opening and slamming shut mysteriously. But who's this Dr. Norman Baker, you ask? Well, in the 1930s, the hotel became an experimental cancer hospital, and Baker, who claimed to be a licensed physician, would do examinations in the basement, charging families large amounts of money to do so. Well, as it turns out, the guy wasn't even a licensed doctor. He was a quack, claiming to have found a cure for cancer. And as you can probably imagine, there are a number of ghosts that haunt the place who were under his quote-unquote care. There's the apparition of a nurse pushing a gurney in Dr. Baker's old morgue area, creating eerie noises as it moves down the hotel halls. There's also the laundry room located next to Dr. Baker's morgue. Washers and dryers mysteriously will turn on in the middle of the night, and housekeepers have reported meeting Theodora in room 419, who introduces herself as a cancer patient of Dr. Baker's and then vanishes.
And finally, we have the Louisiana State Penitentiary, located in Louisiana. Also known as America's goriest prison, the penitentiary is the largest maximum security prison in all of America, and its history is draped in heinous crime, racism, and brutality. At one time, the prison held 3,712 inmates serving life sentences and had an average death rate of about 32 inmates per year who passed due to violent acts, overdose, illness, or self-inflicted harm. Due to medical care in the United States being so expensive, when an inmate became injured or ill, they rarely got the chance to see a licensed doctor, as the prison had a habit of hiring doctors with suspended or even revoked licenses as a way to cut down on costs. The inmates who were forced to perform physically strenuous labor for just pennies a day were given no recreational time other than a short window in which they were allowed to exercise in small individual cages with no equipment that have been compared to dog cages. The prison's death row is also said to be the most haunted place on the grounds. While inmates are now euthanized by lethal injection, at one point in time the inmates had been sentenced to death via electric chair. Unfortunately for those destined to meet this fate, the prison's only electric chair didn't always work the way it was supposed to, often shorting out and just torturing the inmates. When this would happen, the prison would repair the chair, nicknamed Gruesome Gertie, and send the inmates back to their deaths on that very same chair. While this is nowhere near the full list of this particular prison's many atrocities, I think with this information alone, it's very safe to say that this place is absolutely nothing less than pure evil.
Alright, some scary stuff going on. Alright, some scary stuff going on down there in the south.
Pretty dark, yeah.
Not some places you'll probably want to be visiting unless you're really into getting scared and potentially getting cursed.
Yeah, ghost hunting.
Go for it. Yeah,
yeah.
ghost hunt down
Right,
there.
yeah.
All right, folks, we will catch you in the next video. I'm James.
I'm Hannah. See you then.
Bye.